This is a proposed 2024 bingo card. We could just go through this and see what we think. Terrorist event. That's actually a little rarer these days than it has been in the past. Speaking of in the West and speaking of like large enough scale that it was on news, I can't think of one that happened in 2023. Can you guys think of any? Antichrist. I would say that one's quite unlikely, but you know, I have my position on that. One in New York just days ago. I must have missed it. World War III. I mean, that's always a possibility. Bioengineered food crisis. Definite possibility. I think they're not quite far enough into that plan yet, if that is their plan, because there's things that indicate it. But hey, maybe they're further than I think. Power grid event. That's quite possible. I think a lot of the I don't know where I can't localize this statement, but I think a lot of power grids in the Western world have some dependence on China or Chinese technology, which is very bad indeed. Shabom, Virginia. So I suppose that could happen. There's also the problem of like brownouts and blackouts, which third world countries get a lot. And another thing that we have to talk about today is the notion that Portland is really driving it home in its goal to be classified as a third world city. And so brownouts and blackouts even in the US and in other Western countries are a distinct possibility as the economy and infrastructure get worse, as our leaders simply don't have the will to fix things. They merely have the will to take power and then get money from selling it. We're entering solar maximum. Flares and CMEs are a big risk in the coming years. That's interesting. Solar maximum, does that mean the closest point to the sun? Or is that just the sun getting larger? Does the sun fluctuate in size? Maybe it does. Solna says, not including Bill Gates' GMO mosquitoes mutating and killing half the US. I mean, I've heard like a little about that. I don't know much about it, but yeah, something like that is possible. It's unlikely, but it's possible. Yes, Ghost, what a time to be alive. I can't hear that phrase now without hearing that stupid 2-Minute Papers dude saying it. That channel, 2-Minute Papers, is a good channel. It has good information. But the guy presenting it, his voice is unfucking bearable. The only good thing about his voice is that it's funny in a laughing at you kind of a way. But that gets old pretty quickly when all I want to know about is what's going on with AI research these days. Ginger says, no, it means the sun's instability is reaching its peak. Think the sun equivalent of lots of earthquakes. Right, okay, so the second thing I said was a bit closer. That's concerning. But I assume that it is a sort of fluctuation thing and it will go back down again. We're not at the sun's death point, I assume. God, I could add in something here as a little quip, but it would be a spoiler, so I'll leave it. Solar maximum greatest solar activity in 11-year cycle. Okay, fair enough. So yeah, I suppose there could be some sort of EMP event or something. Maybe the solar flare will knock out the AI. Well, if they do, it'll only be temporary. AI is not a discrete entity or magic spell. It is something that we can now create reliably. We have the technique to create it, and everything about it can be stored digitally. So if it goes away, it's only as susceptible to being completely destroyed as our own data and other technologies are. Only been day 2 of 2024 has really started off with a big bang, says you. I wouldn't be surprised if all of the above happens. Quite a lot of it could. Massive solar event, that is, I think, what Ginger was referring to. Politicians jailed, that would be nice. You could find, it'd be nice if, guilty politicians are jailed. Technically, Trump is a politician, so it's possible, but there's dozens, hundreds of politicians just in the US, but also in other places too, that need to be jailed. Lockdown. I don't think they have time. There was that pneumonia spreading from China. I haven't heard much about that in the last week or so. I thought maybe they would try and do something with that. But they probably just about have enough time if they release the virus in the next month or two to get lockdowns going by the time the election is running. And maybe they got a bit more than a month or two, actually. So if they wanted to do that, and if, say, COVID was partly deliberate, which I think at least from the Chinese government lying about it, well, that part was deliberate, but there could have been even more involvement. There could have been even more pre-planning. Either way, it was taken advantage of. if they do want to start something deliberately like that, if someone does, then they don't have that long left to do it before it can have an effect on the 2024 election. Temple Mount destroyed. I don't know what that one's about, but again, sounds kind of religious. I guess, is that like a famous Jewish religious site? I don't know. NASDAQ crash. It could always happen. Yes, okay. Jerusalem Big Temple. Solness says, oh no, sorry. Children says, last time this happened, we were missed by a Carrington event level shitstorm by days. That is, fuck you, Civ, and everything in it, grade bad. I don't know, I've not heard of the expression Carrington event, actually. Temple Mount equals Dome of the Rock. That's just a synonym, Gareth. That doesn't help me understand what it is. That's just a different name for it. There's a picture of it, there you go. That still doesn't help me understand what it is, just what it looks like. But I do know it's the big temple in Israel. Common household item ban. That's possible. They were trying to do gas stoves. I think the gas stove ban may have lost a little bit of energy when that picture of Nancy Pelosi and her husband with a gas stove was released. Yeah, it's a little bit tough to buy it at that point. Carrington event. Carrington event was the most intense geomagnetic storm in recorded history, peaking from 1st to 2nd December 1859 during solar cycle 10. It created strong auroral displays that were reported globally and caused sparking and even fires in multiple telegraph stations. The geomagnetic storm was most likely the result of coronal mass ejection. Okay. Yeah. All right, I see what you're saying. Temple on the Mount, pretty much the Jew version of the Muslim cube. Gotcha, okay. So if you destroy it, they all shut down. Solar flare so big that the equator had northern lights. That's pretty cool, but downsides, obviously. Solar flares and CME is basically just the sun ejecting lots of ionized gas. That gas, if it impacts the Earth, makes the Earth magnetic field wobble. When that wobbles, the magnetic field moves around on all of Earth's circuitry, so if it wobbled enough, it amounts to a well EMP. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, we'll have a look at. We'll look out for that. It's possible. I think a lot of people wouldn't be too unhappy. Like a lot of people here listening probably wouldn't be too unhappy with a lot of Earth technology suddenly disappearing, because they think that what would happen is that everyone would just get sort of a community spirit, get the candles out, play board games, but probably quite a lot of other bad things would happen too, and quite soon you would get, for one thing, quite bored of board games, and for another thing, completely poor out of money. And as Ducksmith says, thank you, Ducksmith, you would lose access to Cabal. I would miss none of you niggers, says Matthias. Bored people fuck so it would fix the low birth rate. I mean, there's some truth to that, yeah. However, right now, the people who are having children are the people who have an ideological reason to want to have a family, and that's people that agree with us ideologically. So, as it is, it's not too bad a situation. There's some strong filtering going on. Cabal becomes a mailing list. We send shitposts via postal service. We should try and set something like that up. That would be horribly inefficient. Just want badass technology instead of cringe tech we have now. So it's pretty healing. Yeah, well, unfortunately, badass technology is pretty expensive. Yeah, it's a good point, Gascap. If you lost all technology, I don't think the postal service would recover very quickly, would it? I think you kind of need technology to support a postal service for this many people. Yeah, Black Tier, it's a tough one. Best advice I can give from my own position is get lucky. Aliens. No. Biden re-elected. Possible. They'll have to rig it again. And I think they probably have to rig it even harder than last time, to be honest. Biden dies. It's also possible. I predicted that Biden would die during his first term. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how serious I was about that, but it was a distinct possibility because the man is falling apart. But the thing is, it's weird. Since 2015-ish, when most agree the sort of dementia started, he's gone on a pretty fast downward slope and then has sort of just plateaued. He's not really getting much worse than he was at the beginning of his term, I don't think. Maybe you guys disagree. What do you think? Do you think it's been at a sort of flat low or a decline? a continuing decline since the beginning of his term. I think it's been at a flat low. I don't think he's been actually getting worse. So maybe he's just, obviously mentally he's kind of shattered, but he's not necessarily getting closer to death, except by the normal amount of by aging through years. PH says, what I mean is if you need a solid engine for a commuter car, flatheads are extremely reliable and cheap to build it and maintain. The downside is lack of power density. I have no idea what you're talking about. A flat, low 4 month. Don't know what you mean by that. You can keep going for years, IMO, says Funky Monk. Yeah, that's my concern, is he didn't die during the first term, so I don't think that he's, in the last few years of his life. I don't think he's going to die any second. I think he might have, because he obviously got best healthcare in the world. If he didn't, maybe he would be a lot closer. But given that, probably he has longer than a single term left, but maybe not. So Biden dies this year, not that likely, but during his second term, it's possible. I'm not saying I want it either. It probably wouldn't solve anything, because if they rig him in and then he dies, then they get whoever they had as VP, which might be Kamala again. Yeah, thank you, Motch. It's very insightful. If he dies before the election, then they'll get someone else and rig them in instead. So it doesn't make much difference if Biden died. Make no mistake, Biden is evil and demented, but he's not the problem. He's merely an extension of it. He's merely a unit of the problem. And him dying or him suffering, it makes no difference, really, to the overall picture. Oh, are you guys? I just realized what you're doing. Are you sending an end tower via virtual post? That's good. We could have a mailing list. We could all CC each other with every single message and just do an end tower with emails. AI reaches ultra instinct. You have many of you have heard my opinions on AI. I won't go into it again here in great detail. But yeah, my thoughts on AI, I've talked about it in Cabal. I'm going to go into it again here because it's a long topic, but I'm very concerned about how disruptive AI could be. And this year, 2024 specifically, AI reaching some sort of singularity or some sort of need of increasing capabilities or whatever. Probably not this year. It'll continue to increase at a rapid rate, but it's not going to hit some new threshold, I don't think, of disrupting industries. It's just going to keep going as it has already been. But next 20, 30 years, it could be almost completely disruptive to several industries. In a sense, Oda, I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, which, again, I don't want to go into in too much detail now, because I already talked about this a few days ago in Cabal. But the idea of gaining sentience it's not a fixed point. It's a bit of a gradient, and if you want to call humanity a god species, it depends what your definition for that is. And does AI technically count as life, even if it gains sentience? Depends what definition of life you're using, and the common biological one arguably does not apply in the case of AI. So, but answering your question non-autistically, I think we're pretty much at that point where humanity is creating its offspring life form, used in a broad sense. You is correct. One of the best benefits of AI is the butthurt it's creating. Virus outbreak, similar to the lockdown thing. Yes, could happen. But if we're talking about non-artificial viruses, I mean, COVID was artificial. I suspect its release was incompetence, but then the cover-up was deliberate, and the way the West utilized it was deliberate, unfortunately. So that's the sort of a complex series of blame profiles there. But the only way I think you're going to get, a worldwide outbreak like that, or something similar, again, is when some parts of that process are deliberately made worse. Because without that, I don't think, I'm not going to say that there's no chance of a virus that's dangerous enough to actually be a threat, even if we try to prevent it. But the chance is very low. China invades a country as another option. Well, again, possible, but the country they really want to invade is Taiwan. But they can't win in Taiwan unless the US just does nothing. I don't think the US is quite weak enough to just do nothing yet. Is Taiwan a country for the purposes of that box? I think it is, Ghost, because it's not necessarily invades a nation with a very different culture than China. It really is. It's just it invades anywhere that someone else claims to own. China claims to own Taiwan, but realistically doesn't. Although, I've mentioned this before, technically, every country except a few recognize Taiwan as part of China officially. The US does, the UK does, pretty much all of Europe does. However, in practice, no, we don't. They invade India every other week. Yeah, like tiny incursions on the border, I think. But yeah, I don't think China's going to invade a country anytime soon. The one they'd really want to invade is one they can't win. The only thing I could maybe see is that things heat up between India and China. But then I don't think we're at the point of invasion yet this year. National weapon restriction. Well, the US establishment are constantly trying to do that. But the US public have shown decent resistance to that, so I'm not sure about that. Physical cash ban. I think certain forces are moving towards that, but they're not quite there yet for 2024. I'd be wrong, though. Civil war. Tim Pool has one good point about this, and that's that a civil war doesn't mean that literally everyone is involved in the fighting. Life does go on to a certain extent, but you will occasionally get acts of violence in public. By that definition, I don't think we really are in a civil war, as he says. Like we, being the US or really any part of the Western world, maybe you could argue France because of the constant revolts that they have there. Well, it is France after all; they are revolting. But in the US, I don't think there's anywhere like that. There was in 2020, maybe shortly after as well. But an actual civil war, like by the common definition, common understanding, half the states against half the states, or somewhere approximately like that. One thing that I could see leading to that is this trying to get political candidates off the ballot thing. If the Supreme Court back down in cowardice and don't do the right thing on that, if they don't strike down this anti-democratic action, then that is a distinct possibility, because then half the states will get Biden off the ballot, half the states will get Trump off the ballot, and that really puts to shame every other possible use of the term constitutional crisis. I mean, the Democrats don't really care whether they get Biden or someone else. It's still wrong to remove him, except to the extent, actually, that he did what he did, or what he was involved in 2020, was an insurrection far more so than Trump's thing was, by rigging the election. I don't think Biden was the architect of that, but I'm sure he knew about it, and I'm sure he benefited from it. So getting Biden off the ballot is actually, you could argue, is justified, but I still don't think it should be done. Similarly to obviously not removing Trump, and removing Trump is just a political action. It's not a like a just action. Yeah, it's how old is France's republic at this point? Is it I think it's about the same age as America's, isn't it? 80s? 3 weeks. A bunch of different fucking answers. World War II. Oh, 80. Okay. All right, my mistake then. Maybe the duration of 250 years that's often cited for republics, maybe France won't get anywhere near that. You never know. Too old, it should be conquered again. I mean, I feel like if you were to rearrange that 250-year life expectancy down to a human life expectancy, then Epstein would think that France is too old. Political assassination. I've mentioned before that I think that the US establishment's attempts to get rid of Trump have been so intensive, going as far as making up crimes that he's committed and now trying to get him off the ballot in general, that we actually may be able to have a fair bit of hope that they don't have the 2024 election rigging nailed down. because I think they want Trump to not be a candidate. I think that's what they're aiming for. That's why they did January 6th. It was all to try and get Trump illegitimized. But it didn't work. None of it worked. He's still the most popular candidate in the Republican Party by a long way, maybe even more than at any other year. Even though now some of the alternative candidates are also MAGA, he's still so much more popular than any of them. So they've totally failed in that regard. I do think that they will go as far as physically removing him rather than letting him run legitimately this time. I don't think they were there last time, but I think this time they are there. I'm not sure if they would go as far as assassination, but I think they would see assassinating Trump as less of a bad thing than him winning the election. So be ready for that possibility. Large casualty event is the next one. It's kind of generic, unless it means causality event and the supposition of a time traveler, but I don't think it does mean that. Large casualty event could be almost anything. And it's just as possible this year as every other year, maybe a little bit more, unfortunately. Massive cyber attack. They happen almost all the time, if you didn't know. Fuel shortage. That is currently in progress under Biden's economics. But if Trump is re-elected in 2024, that is very unlikely. Voodoo says, we already had a political assassination this year. The South Korean. Yep, I had that story today. Yep. Well done, Voodoo. I was actually thinking about that while I was talking about the political assassination story. I do have that. We'll go into that today. All right, next beam.